Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us once again for another edition of MIP. Have a very special guest with us today. And you all know I'm a politics person and a numbers person. Um, and I think it's time that we have this conversation, especially with what's going on out here. A great deal of Asian hate, anti-Asian violence, and what have you. So, want to talk to someone who is one of the very few Asian American Pacific Islander women pollsters in America. And she happens to work for an organization known as HIT Strategy. She's a founding partner, chief research officer, and COO too, I believe. Am I right about that?
Yes.
So she's wearing a lot of hats. We're honored to have her, and they've been doing a lot of work in terms of polling Americans and others, and particularly millennials and Gen Zers like myself. Okay, so don't laugh at me, Roshni. Uh, um, but we're happy to have with us Roshni Nedungadi is with us here on Make It Plain. Roshni, welcome to MIP. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. Doing well, doing well.
It is a pleasure, in fact, to have you. I want to just start out with something you tweeted the other day, and I guess some polling you all have looked at. And you asked a question: have you or anyone you personally know experienced any anti-racist or anti-Asian comments or behavior as a result of the spread of the coronavirus here in America? It was 40% overall and 34%, I believe, for men, but 46% for women. Talk to us a little bit about that information and how you came by it and interpret it for us, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this was actually a poll that we did specifically in Michigan among Asian American, Pacific Islander, and also Middle Eastern respondents in Michigan. And it's something that AAPI people around the country have been noting with increased incidence over the last year or so, ever since the emergence of coronavirus, and ever since Donald Trump and other Republicans tried to blame it on the Asian community and on Chinese immigrants specifically. There's been a rise in anti-Asian sentiment that people have been experiencing in America. And I think this poll, which was taken just about a month ago, we got out of the field with this poll in Michigan, highlights the severity of what's going on with 40% of the Asian population there in that state, either experiencing personally or knowing someone who has experienced anti-Asian racism. And of course, like you said, that number is higher among women in the state. It's also higher among young folks in the state who I think are experiencing it at much higher levels online as well.
So, I guess, so first of all, why Michigan? You focused on Michigan. Why so?
Mm-hmm. Well, the poll that we did was done in Michigan in partnership with the Michigan Asian American Progressives. And they're an organization that's on the ground trying to harness the voting power of Asian Americans, the civic engagement of Asian American and Pacific Islanders and Middle Eastern folks in the state as well.
Right. And that is that population there.
Yep.
So was there, so the question was generally, and I'm building up to something, the question was generally whether or not they've experienced it as a result of the spread of the coronavirus. Did you all focus on any period of time or just generally since the advent of coronavirus was the question?
Yep, we had just done since the advent of coronavirus. So within the last year or so, had they experienced any increase in racism?
What's scary to me, Roshni, we know obviously that Trump incited a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
What's scary is that he's gone, and for all intents and purposes has been deplatformed. And it says, it's kind of scary that it says a lot that people are carrying out these types of incidents and crimes and making these statements in his absence without him even being seen and heard to do it. It's almost as if they're on their own, picking up where he left off.
Yes, absolutely. And actually a national poll sometime last year before the election saw that Asian American voters saw 58% of Asian American voters thought that anti-Asian sentiment had increased under Trump's 4 years in office. So
Yeah.
while we asked in Michigan specifically over the last year, this sentiment has been growing, and this underlying feeling of being unsafe in the Asian American community has been growing over the last 4 years as a result of Donald Trump.
But let's be clear too. When people make racist statements and carry out racist acts, we know it's because we are all others, but we also know people fear our political power, don't they?
Exactly.
And the AAPI community kicked butt in November at the polls and in Georgia in the special election, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Turnout was through the roof in AAPI communities around the country. In fact, in Michigan itself, turnout was increased by 93% from 2016 among AAPI voters. And if you all remember the margin for Michigan in 2016, Trump won by about 10,000 votes in Michigan. And this increase in AAPI turnout in 2020 resulted in an additional 73,000 votes. So you could say that they were the margin of difference there for sure in the state in order to propel Joe Biden to victory.
Yeah, yeah. And then, I had read somewhere there were like a 250,000 Asian voters, API voters in Georgia alone that helped to make the difference in November and then again in January.
Yes, there were, and especially in districts Georgia 6 and Georgia 7, AAPI voters certainly helped to make the margin of difference there in Georgia in November and also in January. Their increased turnout in Georgia was helpful in flipping the Senate.
So again, we're talking in general, but you focus on young people. So I'm sure those numbers are even skew higher when it comes to Gen Z and millennial AAPI voters, correct?
Yes, absolutely. In 2020, we saw a 350% increase in AAPI turnout nationwide among 18 to 29-year-olds, Asian American 18 to 29-year-olds. So while that is also a very, very exciting thing, a 350% increase, it means that they weren't turning out before. And that's pretty concerning going into 2022, into a midterm election with less enthusiasm, without a figure like Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. We have to make sure that we are keeping those young AAPI voters engaged and make sure that we're maintaining that level of turnout going into next year.
Yeah. So first of all, be clear, folks, this ain't just about no flu or no COVID or whatever you want to call it. People see the power in these communities and the ability to change the political landscape. All right. So that's all. There's always something very tangible like that behind some of this racist behavior. And you too have been outspoken vis-a-vis some of the polling work Hit Strategies has done in what you just said in terms of being sure the Democratic Party is engaging, doing a better job of engaging Gen Z and millennials overall, but especially now at this moment for the AAPI Gen Z and millennial electorate, correct?
Yes, exactly. In a poll that was done in the American Election Eve poll that was done post-election, 50% of AAPI voters nationwide said that they had not been contacted at all by the Democratic Party. And 58% said that they hadn't been contacted by any local organizations on the ground. So while there was huge turnout, it was because of this like existential dread that the Asian community was facing in the face of Donald Trump. It's going to be so important that Democrats and local organizations actually engage with the community this time around and make sure that they are working to turn out these voters.
Wait a minute, you had that turnout that high, and yet people had not even been actually. So then the turnout probably would have been 800%.
Exactly.
Some outreach, right?
Yes, and in fact, 40% of eligible AAPI voters didn't even turn out in 2020.
Right.
So we're missing a huge chunk of these voters still.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what the turnout would have been if we were able to contact them all.
You read my mind. That was my next question in terms of how much we know about how many were missed. So that's 40%. That's a big number.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big number, and it says a lot about how much more engagement needs to happen. Well, if there were ever a moment for people to be engaged and listened to, it's right now, isn't it?
I believe so. And it doesn't take that much to engage the community. They really just want to know that there are people and organizations out there who are listening and advocating for their interests. And just knowing those simple things, knowing that there are organizations looking out for their community, like the Michigan Asian American Progressives who we conducted this poll with, increases their sense of political and civic efficacy and increases their sense of voting power, just knowing that there are organizations like that out there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take that much work.
So no, it doesn't. Now, so when we talk about the AAPI community, that's pretty broad.
Yes.
And so my question to you is, and I think we'd all be well informed by this, how, especially at this time, how unified does that community consider itself? Trump was speaking, shall we say, to a specific section, so to speak, of the Asian community. Mm-hmm. But we talk about the AAPI community as a whole. Is the AAPI community as a whole as unified around these issues as the acronym would suggest?
Well, look, we are a very, very diverse community, as you said, but it's not just the increase or the sentiment against Chinese Americans that's been happening over the last year. We've been feeling it in different levels. I mean, for years and years and years. Right. What happened in Atlanta 2 weeks ago was horrific. About 10 years ago, there was a shooting in Oak Creek in Wisconsin targeting Sikh Americans. Right. There have been so many other incidents targeting the AAPI community. So while it seems like this is just targeting one group or one ethnic group, it's not, and it's something that has carried through over the years. So
yeah, no, I agree, and every opportunity we can take to draw parallels in order to foster unity, yes, is what we ought to do. And that's very, very important. Now, tell us a little bit more about HIT Strategies.
Yeah, so we are a full service research firm started by my business partner, Terrence, and I a couple of years ago because we really wanted to draw attention to these communities that we call the emerging electorate. So young voters, communities of color, women, who we felt were very much underrepresented in a lot of political research. For instance, in the past, when folks wanted to target people of color, they would target them as one group. But we really believe in disaggregating this data, looking at Black voters, splitting that up by young Black voters and older Black voters who think and vote very differently, splitting it up by Black women, Black men who also think and vote very differently, looking at a poll of entirely Asian Americans in Michigan and making sure we're disaggregating by ethnicities, by age, by gender, so that we understand these communities and know how to best position them.
Yeah, no, that's very, very important. Let me ask this first. So, and I also noticed in some other polling you had done, you looked at some things generationally and found that there were some different priorities, yes, weren't they, when it comes to different issues? Can you break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah, so thinking specifically about Generation Z and millennial voters, there are very different priorities among these two groups. Where millennial voters who now go up to age 40 are experiencing the second recession of their adult lives, they have much more economic related policy priorities. How are we going to afford a house? How are we going to afford a car? How are we going to pay back our student loans? You know, these are things that we've been dealing with for many years now. Whereas Gen Z is currently goes up to age 24, very much social justice related. And I think we could see that last summer in some of the Black Lives Matter protests with Gen Z folks out there leading the charge. But one of their three key issues that we've pulled over the last couple of months has been police brutality. And they really want to see action on police brutality. And they rank some of these economic concerns that millennials are focused on a little bit lower on their priority scale comparatively.
And the issues of race as being very, very important.
Yes, to both generations.
Which is a blessing and a curse. I mean, it's troubling that people are dealing with that, but it's comforting because if people have it on their priority list, then they're likely to want to do something about it, right?
Yep. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's exactly what needs to happen. What advice or are you seeking in your ongoing polling and research? You know, what the Democratic Party needs to do in order to hear the voices of the AAPI community? What advice do you think would the AAPI community in any generation give to the Democratic Party? Is it a way to discern that or quantify that through your research?
Yeah, I think it's just that they need to reach out and make sure that they communicate with these voters, make sure that they understand that they're not alone, that there is a party that's advocating for them and that would like to bring them along in the political process. And over the years, we've heard, you know, it's very complicated. It's hard to get enough sample to make inferences. It's hard to make translations for all of the different languages in the community. But it's really not. It's very simple to collect this data, to understand it, and then to make sure that we're just providing simple resources, voting guides, information about candidates, information about how to vote and where to vote in language to some of these communities across America in like very key districts for the election when we're thinking about Michigan, when we're thinking about Georgia going into 2022, thinking about Texas. It's going to be really important to engage these voters.
So what's the next research you're working on? What's the next poll that you all are looking at?
We have quite a few in the field right now, but we're hoping to dig a little bit deeper into the AAPI community nationally so that we can understand, dig a little bit deeper into messaging and understand how to mobilize them going into 2022.
Yeah, because that's the thing, people, you know, I mean, that's the real process. We saw people come out the way they did in 2020, but now the challenge is to make people's voting behavior in 2022 and beyond second nature.
Yeah.
You know, like Georgia, people don't even, I mean, white voters don't even vote in special elections. So what we saw in Georgia was an anomaly, but we have to keep that habit up. And especially now with all the voter suppression tactics that are in place, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Now, something kind of compelling, folks, I just want to point out as Roshni was talking about the increase in voters, I want to be sure I heard you correctly. 93% increase in November for the AAPI community. Did I hear that right?
In Michigan specifically.
In Michigan, okay.
Yep. But 71% overall.
Overall. And then what was it for Gen Z and millennials? It was up over 100% increase?
Yep, 350% for 18 to 29-year-olds.
Y'all hear that? However,
in battleground states.
However, Roshni retweeted something from the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, a graphic. In spite of those increases, anti-Asian hate crimes from 2019 to 2020 increased by 114% in LA, 133% in Boston, 150% in San Jose, 200% in Philly, and 833% in New York City. So this is political power versus hate. And if we do
Yeah.
what we need to do, the political power will win. And we've got to continue to organize. Listen, it's interesting what you just said, this whole thing about languages and what the Democratic Party need to do. At this point, all that, if they can't do that, it's just lazy. This is 2021. And the resources and the technology exist to get that organized in a minute. And so that needs to definitely happen. This has been very informative. This is great. And anything we can do to help promote what you guys are doing or be in any way helpful, let us know. Lastly, as you mentioned, Democratic Party has got a lot to do. Nevertheless, how does it feel for you, Roshni, or to you and to others to have an AAPI and a woman as vice president?
Great. I am a big Kamala Harris fan, and I cannot wait to see what she does in the position.
Yeah.
It's very inspiring.
Yeah. Although it's interesting, I guess you saw Tammy Duckworth and Maze Hirono say, "Well, now wait a minute, we ain't gonna have just one.
Yeah,
you can just give that to us and be like, that's gonna check all the," because she checks about 6 boxes. And they're like, nope, we need some others too. And I'm glad they stood up for that because that's
yes,
really
absolutely
so wonderful. Well, we're all proud and all of that. So, folks, check out Hit Strategies and keep up with what they're doing and keep up with what our guest is doing. And Roshni, of course, keep us posted about all of this. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We're at HitStrat on Twitter, and would love to come back and talk polling anytime.
Yeah, please. We'd love to have you back. Hit Strat on Twitter, Hit Strategies on Instagram, and on the website hitstrat.com, right? Did I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
Okay,
right.
very, very good. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Roshni, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Roshni, hang on while I end this live and then we'll chat for a minute. Stand by.
Sure.